Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this third 2015 edition. This is the Resurrected Word radio show. Here we believe that man does not live on bread alone, nor does he live on just part of God's Word. In all truth, we live on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Therefore, it is the focus of this show to discuss many sacred books that proclaim Jesus Christ. I'm InHISWord2 as your host. Joining me as our main speaker is Robert Farrell, who is also known as Apocryphile1970 here on YouTube. Today we will discuss part 7 of the Revelation series, beginning with chapter 17. Hey, Brother Robert, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing just great, Carol. It's good to talk to you.
Yes, well, we've been in discussions for, 2 weeks now or better, on this particular chapter, 2 chapters, chapter 17 and 18, and
Right.
they're so involved that we probably will scarce to scrape the surface just to bring them, the basics of what's in this text because it's so involved.
Well, it is involved, so I guess we probably better just dive right on into it.
Okay, let's do it then.
Okay, so again, we're picking up here in chapter 17. A couple of things we needed to kind of get out there before we went too far into it is that we know that we had discussed earlier about the wonder in heaven, the woman who was
Mm-hmm.
that
Right,
was
the opposite of this great whore.
right. We wanted to point out the contrast here between the great whore here and the woman who was clothed in the sun and had the 12 stars on her head, and we had identified this as Jerusalem. And well, one of the things that we wanted to point out is that the two are opposites. One is the heavenly Jerusalem, and one is the Jerusalem which is below. These two are in contrast with one another. And where we kind of read a little something about this is back in Galatians 4:21, where Paul is discussing the law, the one being the child of Sarah, and the other being the child of Hagar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have that in the little link there. Yeah, but I'm going to just go ahead and read it here because it's going to kind of provide the template. It says, "Tell me, ye that desire to be under the law, do ye not hear the law? For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, the one by a bondmaid and the other by a free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman was born after the flesh, but he of the free woman was by promise. Which things are an allegory? For these are the 2 covenants, the one from Mount Sinai, which gendereth to bondage, which is Agar. For this Agar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is, and is in bondage with her children. But Jerusalem, which is above, is free, which is the mother of us all. For it is written, Rejoice, thou barren that bearest not. Break forth and cry, thou that travailest not. For the desolate hath many more children than she which hath an husband. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are the children of promise. But as then he that was born after the flesh persecuted him that was born after the Spirit, even so it is now. Nevertheless, what saith the Scripture? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free."
Amen.
Now, one of the things that you're going to see a little bit later on is this urging to come out of her, to come out of Babylon, in other words. The woman here is described as that great city, which is Babylon. And what we just kind of wanted to preface all this with is just so that you have the template, that you have the paradigm here, recognizing what is being said. So I'm going to go over this just a little bit. What does he mean by the hearing of the law? Well, he says that such things are an allegory. So what he means by the hearing of the law is, do you not hear, in other words, that allegorical meaning? Because if you understand it on the spiritual level, then you, like Isaac, are a son of the promise and not the son of bondage. And probably about the best example I can give of this, I know that there are a lot of Christians out there, most of them, I think, well-meaning Christians, who want to say that you have to follow all the rules and follow all the laws and stuff like that. What I wanted to point out just here at the outset is just hopefully something to kind of make people see something that maybe I don't think they do see, and that is that that by obeying the law, or by strict obedience to the law, without an understanding of its allegorical meaning, that is bondage. Or to put it another way, how is it that a person who is under bondage to the law, how is it that such a person could ever come to such an insight? If by obedience and strict obedience to the law, or to the system, or to the Jerusalem that is below, in other words, the earthly level teaching of religion, that alone precludes seeing that higher level meaning. What Paul is saying is, because you don't hear that allegorical meaning of the law, right?
Right.
It puts you in bondage. That in other words, you would never arrive at these insights by strictly following the law. By strictly following the law, in other words, and he's putting the whole law, in a sense, if you read it carefully, under the aegis of fleshliness, and also by comparing it to Hagar and the Jerusalem that is below. So if you cling solely to those things which are below, that would blind you to the Jerusalem that is above. And that, I think, is an important realization here, to understand that strict adherence to the law does not give one, does not provide one with these allegorical insights.
Right.
But just as we had discussed in prior chapters about the woman clothed with the sun, with the earth under her feet, that has to do with that being the upper heavenly level Jerusalem, whereas the lower Jerusalem is actually, like Hagar, associated with this harlot, with the great city. And so when you're looking at this, you've got to be looking at it as two covenants. You have to be looking at the one as the covenant of bondage. And what you're going to see is just a lot of bondage, and a lot of just just negativity based on that lower level meaning, which is the lower Jerusalem, which is the earthly Jerusalem. That's why Revelation is very big about talking about those who dwell on the earth, those who are the kings of the earth, those who are the inhabitants of the earth. You know, it has to do with earthliness, and earthliness is bondage. Earthliness is basically not seeing the heavenly level meaning. Earthliness is basically not seeing that the true covenant. It's the difference between that which is illegitimate and to be cast out, and that which has been promised and to be fulfilled. So as we go through this needs to be in the back of your mind, really, maybe in the front of your mind. You need to be thinking about this in terms of the church as we have it now versus the church as it is becoming. And, that we as the bride of Christ are to clothe ourselves and to adorn ourselves, so that we can be prepared to receive the heavenly groom, which is Christ himself. And so, it's important for us to eschew the lower things, to come out, if you will, of Babylon, which is the great whore, and to enter into the promise, which is something that Paul has been very useful, I think, in providing us with very good insights, tremendous insights into the book of Revelation. And that is, bar none, one of the greatest contributions, I think, that that he's given us in terms of differentiating between the lower and the upper level meaning. The Jerusalem which is below, and as we read in Revelation, the Jerusalem which is above, which is going to come down upon the earth. In other words, all of this earthliness, all of this earthly meaning or whatever is going to be transformed into a heavenly upper level meaning. And that we ourselves are going to be that temple, and we ourselves are going to be part and parcel with that higher level meaning. This is when we receive our inheritance. So again, I think this is an important section, and this is an important paradigm. So I just kind of wanted to get that out of the way before we just started reading it. But with that said, looking at chapter 17, starting verse 1, it says, "And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, and I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication." So again, the great whore is contrasted with the woman that is clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet in chapter 12. But that, again, we discussed before, was that was the heavenly Jerusalem, and that these are the 2 women as they are discussed. One is glorified, and the other one is debased or abased in all of this. And so what do we mean by inhabitants of the earth? What do we mean by kings of the earth? The inhabitants of the earth basically just represent people in general who follow earthly teaching, the lower level teaching. They're subject to the kings of the earth. The kings of the earth are those whose kingdoms are earthly. Like, remember, Jesus even said, "Look, if mine were an earthly kingdom, my Father would send me, however many legions of angels or whatever to fight with you, but mine is not an earthly kingdom." So by contrast, the kings of the earth are those who have set themselves up against God so that they can have a kingdom here on earth. And this is why you see so much anti-Christian, just the anti-Christian sentiment everywhere. It's a genuine spirit which emanates from the wicked one, whose survival and whose prosperity depends on obscuring the heavenly level meaning, whose kingdom relies on covering up the truth about God. And any religion but Christianity, any kind of teaching, but the truth. You see this over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
In music, you see it on the award show, you see it on the Super Bowl, you see it everywhere. It's always just right in front of your face. There's satanic imagery, there's anti-Christian imagery, upside down crosses. You'll see these kinds of imagery and stuff, and that's because the church has been invaded by wicked people from the beginning who subverted the truth, who took our freedom which we had in Christ, who took our freedom which we had in that higher level meaning, and obscured it through legalism, and through taking the keys of knowledge and hiding them, through taking the insight about that heavenly Jerusalem and subordinating it to the Jerusalem which is below, the Jerusalem which Paul says now is. So when later on we talk about coming out of her, this is what we're getting at, that there is an earthly church which honoreth God with their lips, that honoreth Christ with their lips, but their hearts are far from them, because they dwell on earthly things, and they're limited by earthly understanding. And so the strict adherence to the law, any law, it takes your eyes off of the heavenly Jerusalem, and it causes you to fixate on the things which are below, the things which are earthly. Now, that isn't to say that they're evil or they're bad, but they're images nonetheless. I mean, I could give you an example. Why does God say that He's tired of, or that He's had enough of the fat of bulls and the sacrifices and all this stuff? You have to look at it like this. why is it that the priests, and only the priests, are the ones who are to do the sacrifice? And also, why is it that the animal has to be innocent and spotless and everything? It does point to Christ, and it has have its prophetic meaning. Like, in other words, Christ is the sacrificial lamb, actually the lamb that has been slain since the foundation of the world. And it does point to the fact that he, as the sacrificial lamb, will be put to death at the hand of the religious establishment. So there's prophecy in that. But when you look at it on a deeper level, most of what you see in terms of the laws are images. Like Paul says, that such things serve as an allegory. Mm-hmm. That what it means is that it is the religious institution that kills that which is spotless. That it is a religious institution that slays that which is innocent. And that's essentially what the religious establishment functions as. That is, in a sense, the way Satan envisions his religious kingdom to be, to destroy that which is heavenly by covering it up with that which is earthly, to deprive that which is holy and innocent of its existence and of its life and of its meaning, basically in order to reduce it to something that has a certain religiosity and all of the trappings of religiosity, but it's all just smoke in your eyes. It's like smoke from the bottomless pit of lies that comes up to try and fool you. In a sense, by adorning the churches with gold and with decorations and with statues and with stained glass and with music and this and that, it looks very much like it's one thing. But when you look at the fact that there are these higher level meanings, that there is this heavenly Jerusalem, that we're not talking about allegories, we're talking about individuals. So the basic allegory of Sarah and Hagar gets lost in making them concrete human figures and speaking of them only in terms of their physical and their natural appearances rather than the heavenly level meanings. And so by trying to put these keys back in your hands, trying to give you these truths again, and to restore these mysteries, the idea is that we are going to ourselves transform our understanding so that we can actually be lights and examples to the world, and to take away the blinders, if you will, and the veil that has stood between people and the true temple of God, which is their hearts. That he's going to take out our hearts of stone and give us a heart of flesh, such that we can become a habitation to the Lord. But that requires us to turn our backs on the Jerusalem which is below, which is basically part and parcel with Babylon. It's basically just the religious angle, I guess, on a whole secular society. It's just part of Satan's plan to blind us to the truth by giving us something that seems to be true, but in fact is a lie, or at best a deception. It continues. It says, "So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns." And again, we discussed the wilderness. The wilderness is this age, basically the 6,000 years of our wandering. A wilderness is a place of wandering. As if to say that, like, we as human beings are just sort of wandering aimlessly without any real sense of where we're going, any sense of purpose, and that sort of thing. It's a place of fasting and of suffering, just like Jesus went out into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. That we are in a place of temptation ourselves. So it has to do with this age. That this woman, who we later find out represents Babylon, that great city, is seated upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. We discussed the 7 heads and the 10 horns previously. And so we're just going to continue the thought here. We'll explain it a little bit further as we get into it. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color. Again, it's interesting to note that that when you read the Gospels, John, Matthew, Mark, and yeah, they talk about how Jesus was given robes. In John, for example, it's spoken of that he was given a purple robe, and in Matthew, this 27:28, it says that they put on him a scarlet robe, and also in Mark, they gave him a purple robe. So, in other words, this could be related to basically to Christianity, to basically a false image of Christ or whatever. But it's interesting that those two colors are the same colors that Jesus was clothed in when he was being mocked and put on trial. That the woman is decked with gold and with precious stones and with pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of the abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. This is imagery of, you know, her wealth and how she decks herself out, of course. But you know, it's an image of self-indulgence. It's an image of pride. It's an image of excess. It's you know, it was Lucifer who was cast down for his pride. But it is an image of greed and of you know, just excess. And upon her forehead was a name written: Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And again, here we're talking about the entire earthly perspective as an end in itself, as a guiding force or guiding light, if you will, for those whose hearts are set upon the things of the earth. And it comes with its consequences. It comes with abomination. It comes with filthiness. And her fornication, again, this is a spiritual fornication. We're talking here about like how in James, when it talks about those who you know, who love the earth or whatever, that they are adulterers and adulteresses. And this is basically the spirit that runs this earth. You know, they don't want you to know the truth about God. They don't want you to know the truth about the scriptures. They themselves, many of them, are blind to the truth, and that is because of these earthly pursuits. You know, they seek the gold, they seek the pearls, they seek the precious stones and all of that. Now, this woman was drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And again, remember we talked about earlier in previous episodes about how it was that there were saints that were alive at the time, who existed at the time, who knew the heavenly level meaning, and how they were marginalized, and they were labeled as heretics, and the truth was basically taken away, that they were marginalized, that they were cast out of the church, that they were killed, and so forth. And this is basically taking that heavenly level meaning and reducing it then to the flesh and blood meaning, so that they could get another 2,000 years out of you know, the church. Because I mean, the thing was that Satan's power had been destroyed by this heavenly level meaning. But if he could cover it up again and get people to come to his side, and he could fool them with the earthly level meaning, then he would be able to, in a sense, hoodwink us and take away the power that God had given us to destroy him. And this is part of the way he does it, through his show, through his pageantry, through the idea that what you're looking at through this opulence is somehow a blessing from God, when in fact it is a substitute for God. It is a counterfeit religion. It is a counterfeit institution, right? Which is designed to elicit in us a feeling of great admiration and wonder. And so even John here, it says, and when I saw her, this, in other words, Babylon, the great whore, it says, I wondered with great admiration. And I know that you kind of made a note here. I just want to stop here a minute. That admiration could be thought of as like, wow, that's great. But apparently when you look at the Greek word, that's not quite what John is doing. John isn't looking at it in admiration such that he likes it or wants to be a part of it or whatever. But it's more like astonishment.
He was drop-jawed. Like, in our modern day terms, he was just drop-jawed at it.
Right. And so the angel stops and makes a kind of a comment here. It says, and the angel said unto me.
Let's back up just a second. Remember when we was talking about verse 4 and the purple and scarlet and the fornication, we also saw that back in Revelation 2:20 that this woman was also depicted as Jezebel, who taught and seduced the servants to commit fornication. And so we also saw how this paralleled with Thyatira. And so...
Well, yeah. And,
go ahead.
No, there was a note that you made that there was in Acts, there was a certain woman of the city of Thyatira.
I have that too. Yeah.
There's some connection here, so it's probably worth looking at. If you look at Acts 16, 14, and 15, you talk about the great whore, and then you look back to
this woman named
the letters to the churches where he talks about when he talks about Jezebel or whatever, that Jezebel is basically the great whore
of Babylon,
but with reference, but with reference to the church, right? Because the great whore of Babylon is more than just that. The great whore of Babylon is more than just Jezebel. Jezebel would be like a manifestation of the great whore, but within the church and directed at the church. The great whore is basically the whole world. So it's kind of a subset, if you will. But it's interesting how when you talk about the city of Thyatira, it talks about Lydia, who was a seller of purple. So apparently there's some connection between the dye here and Thyatira, and there's a sort of a connection here between Jezebel of Thyatira and the great whore of Babylon.
Right.
So I'm not sure if I can quite put my finger on just exactly what that connection is, but there's something. There's something there.
And maybe
but in any case,
and more study into it can leave a pertinent comment in the section beneath the video, and maybe they see it more clearly than we do, and can bring it into full focus for us. We just know there's something there, and that's why I wanted to back up and say something about that. Okay.
Well, the woman, again, she was drunken with the blood of the saints, meaning that by the time all the saints had been killed and basically their testimony had been reduced to the earthly level, in the same way that Hagar, being the bondwoman, they wanted to put us into bondage. That when Paul says that we are the children of Sarah, he's talking to his own congregation. Well, they would have been the blood of the saints. You know what I'm saying? It would have been them, I guess, whose blood had been shed. Those who were the actual children of Sarah, as opposed to the children of Hagar. Because again, when he speaks of the Jerusalem that now is, remember earlier we talked about the synagogue of Satan. The Jerusalem which now is basically is legalism. A sense of that the law is something in and of itself and does not carry with it an allegorical meaning. That isn't to say that if you want to keep the Sabbath or something like that, that's inherently wrong, but to do so without understanding or acknowledging that the Sabbath and on all of these rituals that you follow are signs and symbols and point to other things, is something that it will inevitably lead you to blindness. Yeah, spiritual blindness, and spiritual bondage. Because if the Sabbath is nothing but the Sabbath to you, and it doesn't symbolize to you that seventh millennium, then you're missing out on God's true Sabbath and his true rest and his true day. You see what I'm saying? And so, in other words, strict adherence to the law without an understanding, without hearing the law, as Paul puts it. Do you not hear the law? In other words, don't you hear it on its spiritual level? Don't you understand it in its spiritual sense, right? You who want to be subject to it, right? Do you not hear it? He's basically saying that they don't, is what he's saying. He's saying you don't hear the law because the law is allegories. It's allegorical. And that's what the hearing of the law is. And unless you can hear the law, you are in bondage, and you properly belong to the Jerusalem which is below. And again, Satan just wanted to go back and do what he had done before. He had blinded the Jews to the law. He had blinded them to the allegorical meaning, which Paul is trying to clue us into, right? Because none of the Jews understood it on the allegorical level. You see what I'm saying? In other words,
that's right.
But he was saying that now you Christians, in other words, his own congregation to whom he was speaking there in Galatians, the church of Galatia, right? Those people had been clued in to the meaning of the law, and somehow they were wrestling with this evil spirit, this evil whatever that was at work in their congregation, trying to use the law in order to obscure that heavenly meaning, in order to get rid of it. So it's showing us, it's giving us a witness to that phenomenon. And this is what happened. The woman became drunk with the blood of the saints in the sense that if she could get rid of the saints, she could reign. If Babylon could get rid of the true church, if Jezebel could get rid of true Christians like that, you see it all as allegorical. If the true meaning could become obscured, all right, then what would happen is that Babylon could reign. So that's the intention here, is to overcome the Christians, overcome the church, destroy the heavenly level meaning, and obscure it with earthly level meanings. And so what you do is you create a church and you pretend that that's the truth. You put forth that that's the truth. Like the whoever was bewitching the Galatians, as he put it, was trying to put legalism before the allegory. In other words, to destroy the heavenly level meaning and replace it with the earthly, so that it looked for all the world like they were worshiping God. So it looked for all the world like they were being obedient. But it was subterfuge. It was a pretense to worship, and it was a pretense to spirituality, to destroy that which was spiritual by pushing the earthly level meaning. And so again, this is why the earthly things are an abomination to God, because the earthly things tend to crowd out and to assert themselves over the heavenly level things, such that the heavenly level meaning gets lost. And this happened. Galatians is supposed to be one of the earliest of the Pauline epistles, according to scholars. Not that it matters, but I mean, if there's any truth to that notion that it's one of the earlier epistles of Paul, it means that the spirit of earthliness was in the church very early, and it was something that was active from that time all the way down to our own time. And anyway, so John looks at this image in the wilderness, because again, where was that other woman taken? She was taken out into the wilderness, was she not? Right, where she was nourished for a time, times and half a time. Again, the time, times and half time correspond with the age, right? Well, anyway, but the great whore, whatever, is out in the wilderness as well. So it's all indication of what's happening in the 6,000 years. It's all an indication of what's happening in this age of wandering, waiting, fasting, etc. So anyway, but when John looked at her, it says here with great admiration, but what we're trying to point out is that it's a sense of wonder or astonishment, perhaps, just striking to him. Not necessarily that he liked it or that he approved of it, or it was something that he had a desire for.
Right. It's more
or an
like
admiration for.
it's more like this word
The
had
words
a
kind of
different
change
meaning.
meaning, I think.
Right, over
Yeah, I
time.
mean, when you look back at words change over time, and they become subtly different. And this is just one of those cases where the word is just subtly different, I think, from a previous understanding. But the
Right.
angel said unto me, wherefore didst thou marvel? Right? In other words, I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her, and which hath the 7 heads and the 10 horns. So in other words, by way of the answer, you can kind of get at what John was thinking. You can kind of get in his head because the angel is speaking to what John was thinking. So if you look
Right.
at what the angel said, you can then kind of retrofit it and get kind of into John's head.
That he was
Right?
astonished. He was
Well, John
awestruck.
was obviously wondering what is. Well, okay, but for the angel to say, "I will tell thee the mystery of the woman," means that John was wondering, what is the mystery of this,
Right.
right? You see what I'm saying? And
Mhm.
so that's kind of what his question was, like, what is this, or what does this mean? And so the angel answers, saying, "Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast, which carrieth her that hath the 7 heads and 10 horns." Now this is where it gets tricky. So I'm going to take a little bit of time here and try to elaborate on this, because this is easy to miss unless you really, really, really follow the logic here. So,
We spent a lot of
Carol,
time
just watch, make
discussing.
sure I don't say the wrong thing here.
Okay.
But in any
Yeah, we
case,
spent a lot of time going over this part. So, yes.
okay, yeah, the beast which thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and one is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. And these have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords, and King of kings. And they that are with him are called, and chosen, and faithful. So let me just kind of work from that. There's a lot here
There's a
that
lot.
needs to be explained. There is a lot. But first of all, let's look at this last little part here for just to kind of give you some context. When it says that that these shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. Okay, now in a sense he already has. He's overcome them in the sense that what he has done and what he has said stands forever unchanged.
Right.
But we have to catch up to it.
Mhm.
Okay, we have to catch up to what that meaning is, because he's given them time and space in order for them to work out their wickedness and their evil desires. But you have to look at where it says here that those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. Now, these again, with reference to the time that then was, the faithful, the called, the chosen, these were the ones who gave their lives and who preserved these mysteries and who spoke the truth, and many of them paid the price for having done so. They may have been martyred, they may have been exiled, or excommunicated or whatever. However it was that they suffered, they were faithful in their suffering, and this is why God chose them and then called them into existence so that they could do his work. Now I say of the latter rain, those of us who are coming along who are now picking up on these allegorical meanings and are starting to notice the heavenly level Jerusalem as opposed to the Jerusalem that now is, in other words, the church of the world, by the world and for the world, all in the trappings of religiosity and whatnot. but largely either lost or deceiving. And you know, to understand what's going on in the world, why there is so much anti-Christian sentiment, why there's so much anger and hatred towards Christian teachings. The sanctity of marriage is under attack. You know, the notion that Christians are bad and evil people, when probably they, above all people, are the most tolerant, the most inclusive, you know, the most accepting of other people and other cultures. There really is no actual basis for it. They're not technically persecuting other people, at least not, you know. In other words, most of what is most of this hatred comes from a very dark and evil place, which even those who hate can barely explain. And that is because there is a spirit of Antichrist, and there is a spirit of those who are at war against God, because he has the power to overcome them. Early in the church, Satan recognized that he was defeated. You know, when he put Jesus, the man, to death, he set in the fabric of history that if Jesus was the Logos, that forever the Logos would have been spit upon and railroaded in a bogus trial, tried before the people in a fit of anger and rage and passion and whatnot. When he did that, he set forever the paradigm that as Jesus, the man, was murdered and killed and silenced and buried under the earth, that the Logos itself, in like fashion, in like manner, would forever stand as having been railroaded by the religious institution, spat upon by the religious institution, and hung up for an open shame by the religious institution, and then buried under the earth, literally under the earth, to indicate that the earthly meaning would obscure the Logos for 3 days and 3 nights. When that happened, Satan's fate was sealed, because people could come along 2,000 years after and say, hey, on the spiritual level, the Logos was destroyed. And you see by the recovery of the Logos that it had been covered up and buried under earthly terms and earthly meaning. So in other words, he had lost already. So he knew he had the power to be defeated. Now his one weapon was to try and come back from this by reinstituting the old Jerusalem, the Jerusalem that then was. This is why you had the false apostles. This is why you had the synagogue of Satan, to try and make what was new old again, by trying to cover up the light by overemphasizing the fleshly level. And so these kings, and Satan's kingdom is everywhere. It's in governance. It is in the educational system. It is in other religions besides Christianity, okay, to say the least. That he has the whole world, in a sense, working for him. He has the people that he has called, he has the people that he has chosen, and then he has his functionaries, you know, basically your naive idealists out there, and your useful idiots out there, and then the whole rest of the mankind who is either indifferent or got better things to do than to fight it. You know, and it functions this way throughout the world down to this day. So when it says that that they have one mind and give their power and their strength unto the beast, and you've got it highlighted here that it's like almost miraculous power, like it's almost a miracle that they have the power even to do this, because again, the truth is so strong, the truth is so powerful, you know, that it honestly is a miracle and a wonder that they could cover it up. And we'll get into that too, because God has put it in their hearts to fulfill his will, it says a little bit later on. So it's only through God's will that they are able to do this. But they don't actually have any real power. They don't actually have any real strength. What they have has been given to them by God, you know, so that they will play this whole drama out so that God can judge them. And I'm getting ahead of myself. But now with that in mind, let's go back. Let's go back to verse 8. And let's read it from there with that understanding. It says, the beast which thou sawest was and is not. Well, how is it that it was and is not? Well, in the time of the apostles, in the time of Paul and of John and of Peter and all that, the people who knew the mystery saw right through the religious institution. They would have understood, for example, Sarah and Hagar as representing the two covenants. Right. They would have understood it on the allegorical level. All right. So in that sense, the beast was no longer anything because they saw right through it. The beast had been in a sense made powerless by the knowledge. In other words, once you see the truth, you can't be fooled and you can't be conquered again. This is why you have to be killed or bought off or something like that. Satan has to kill you or find something base in you in order to conquer you. And so, but the beast that was the whole world and the religious institution that had relied on deceiving people into thinking that there was no heavenly level meaning and not seeing that higher level meaning so that they could be in bondage, as Paul puts it in Galatians. Right? And so, in other words, the beast that thou sawest was, in other words, for the 4,000 years prior, and is not, because the people now see through it, but it says, it shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. And again, the pit is a hole in the earth. It has to do with that which comes out of the earthly teaching, and it's bottomless because there's no end to the level of earthly. There's no well, you look at science, you look at education, look at all the atheism that's there. Look at all the in religion, you know, all of the many denominations and what they all think and what they all teach. I mean, and there's no end to it. It just multiplies exponentially over time. Right. And that's because it comes out of the earth. It's an earthly teaching. That's what a pit is, a hole in the earth. And it goes into perdition. Why? Well, because it was and is not, and then it ascends out and goes into perdition. So again, it's like it was and is not, but when it ascends, from our point of view in time, it's like saying it was. And when we overcome it and it goes into perdition, it's like saying now in our day that now once that happens, it is not. You see what I'm saying? So in other words, there's that pattern that it was. Perdition
also means destruction.
Well, remember the beast and the false prophet are cast into the lake of fire, and they are there for the millennium, because there is no more false prophecy and there is no false religious institution, which is the beast. Right? Because they have been overcome. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. Right. But it says that they who dwell on the earth shall wonder. Again, we have to look at the nuances here. Those who dwell on the earth, those whose thoughts are earthly, whose spirituality is based on worldly understanding, that they're awestruck, that they marvel greatly, that they wonder, they're amazed. In other words, all those things that it
was kind of like, oh wow! I mean, they actually did admire because their names.
Yeah, it's like they were impressed by it.
Yeah, it was like these two words were kind of mixed up. Admiration, John saying that John did the admiring. Actually, it was more likely that these people of the earth did the admiration. So it's kind of like they flipped those.
Well, again, we read earlier about how, you know, the beast that the beast had the ability to show wonders before the people in the sight of men. In other words, according to men's understanding, their sight. In other words, the earthly sight versus the heavenly vision. Right. So if your name is not written in the book of life, it means that you lack this insight and are not open to it. Right. Or that you are drawn towards earthly things and are resistant to spiritual truth. And they see the beast which was and is not and yet is. Okay, so the beast that was and is not and yet is, remember we just read that it was and is not and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit? So that explains the and yet is part. Right? Shall ascend, because he shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, he is. Even though he is not, he is. And why is that? Well, again, it goes back to what I've said over and over and over again throughout this whole series. It has to do with the fact that the earthly level meaning, Sarah, Hagar, something like that, it points to something heavenly. Paul says they're allegories. So there is an intimate relationship between the earthly level meaning the earthly word, the earthly thing, and the heavenly level meaning. You just have to tie those two together. It's an ambiguity. You can see Sarah and Hagar as just people, or you can see them on the spiritual level, that they form an allegory, right? But if you don't see the heavenly thing, then the lower thing obscures the heavenly thing. It keeps you from finding it. It keeps you from seeing it, right? It's the one thing that does. And yet, the meaning is still there, whether you see it or not. So, in other words, a thing can be and not be all at the same time, in the sense that you can see Sarah and Hagar as one thing, but in fact they are something else entirely. So the spiritual meaning perhaps is not, but yet is, right?
It's all perspective.
Well, we'll just turn it around. So in other words, the spiritual meaning is in the ascendant when he says that the beast is not.
Right.
The beast is not because the spirit is.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So when people were in the spirit, there was no need for the system. There was no need for the beast, right? The beast had no power. Okay? So those who were written in the book of life had overcome. Babylon is fallen. That's the first one. That's why it always says Babylon is fallen, right?
Right.
Because look at it. It says was and is not, and then shall ascend out of the pit and go into perdition. That again is that it exists again. So from our perspective, it was, and then it goes into perdition when it's overcome. Is from our perspective, it is not. You see what I'm saying? And so, in other words, for him to say that it was and is not and yet is, the reason why it yet is because it is possible to overcome the spiritual with the earthly.
Yes.
It is written into the nature of the scriptures to be enlightening and benighting all at the same time. And it's designed to split between soul and spirit, just like that. Just right down the line. Okay, and this is why you have to have wisdom. Well, okay, so let's go into this, because this is a little thorny. So I'll just try to explain here. First of all, well, okay, it's better than the other word, but I mean, there's the idea of the beast, there is the idea of the head, and there is the idea of the horns. And so you have to make this differentiation. So I'm just telling you this. So when you follow me, think about it. Am I talking about the beast? Am I talking about the head? Or am I talking about the horn? Okay?
Right.
Now, here's the mind that hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, or 7 kingdoms, on which the woman sitteth. Okay? And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen. 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. Okay, so just stop right there. Let's stop. Previously, in previous episodes, I talked about how there was kind of a relationship between the number 7 and the number 10. You see it all throughout the book of Revelation. The 7 heads, for example, are like the 7 kingdoms. They're somewhat akin to the 7,000 years, but here's where you have to you really have to pay attention. What had happened was that for the remaining 3,000 years, like there would be a head and a horn, like a kingdom and a king. In other words, because the horns are kings, and the heads are like kingdoms. Okay, and all up through the first 4,000 years, you basically have Judaism. And what you begin to see is that Judaism basically forms an alliance with the secular kingdom of Rome. And so, in a sense, Judaism now has 2 horns. Because, in a sense, it is now in alliance with, albeit a difficult alliance with, the secular kingdoms of this world. They're concerned about the Romans coming and destroying them if they allow Jesus to live and to speak. Probably rightly so. But if they had allowed Jesus to live, I don't think the Romans could have come and taken him. But be that as it may, it shows an alliance. Now the head, the 5th head, which is the beginning of the 5th millennium, right? The 5th head now has 2 horns on it, because it is a dual kind of thing, church and state. the religion, and so in other words, now the heads start to have two horns. All right. So when it says that 5 are fallen, all right, parallel that which the beast which was and is not. Okay. So the 4,000 years that count as 4 heads, right, and then the one into the 5th millennium. In other words, where the Jews and the Romans are kind of in an alliance together, right? That is the 5th head,
right?
Okay, or the well,
it isn't the entire 5th head. It's the very beginning of the 5th millennium.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Well, anyway, there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen. So we're talking about the mountains here, first of all. So the mountains represent the 7 the 7 kings.
Right.
But the way you have to see it is now, because there's a church and state entity, each of the mountains, or in this case, each of the heads, also, in addition to that, have 2 horns because of that alliance. Now, that had been broken. Because, again, you see in AD 70 how the Romans took and destroyed Jerusalem.
Right.
And it was gone. It was destroyed. So, in other words, those 5, even though it was just a little bit into the 5th millennium, it counted as 5.
Right.
Okay? So, in other words, those 5 are fallen. And one is not yet come. Basically, there is now a new entity, which is Christianity, and it is going to become part of the Roman Empire.
Right.
And so it has the 2 horns as well. In other words, one for the religious establishment, the church, and the other for the state. And so for the next 2,000 years, right, you're going to see the 6th and the 7th head. You see what I'm saying? The 6th and the 7th heads are the 2,000 years of Christianity.
But actually, it's the second half of, or the second portion of the 5 and the 6.
That's right, because the one was cut short.
Right, that's where
the one was cut short. Like even Jesus said, look, unless those dates had been cut short, right, that no flesh would be saved. Right. It has to do with the fall of the church and state, or the Jewish whatever state, and Rome has been destroyed and replaced by the incipient form of the Christian church and state thing, where eventually that would grow into the Roman Empire, and like through Constantine. Would eventually become official.
That was in that 5th
but the
portion.
idea is that, okay, so let's go back and plug that in. It says, and here is the mind that hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And again, she's in the wilderness, so that's the 6,000 years. And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, that is to say Judaism, all the way up to the time of Christ, Jesus, and also, a little bit into it. When after they've crucified Jesus, and up into the time that they're basically destroyed and dispersed by the Romans. And the one that is the incipient one, the incipient relationship between Christianity and the world. Right. That as Christianity becomes part and parcel with the world, after a period of several centuries, it officially becomes the religion of the empire, the Roman Empire. But it gradually moves that way because it becomes earthly, and because it loses touch with the original meaning. So, in other words, that which is fallen ascends again out of the bottomless pit, in the sense that through the bottomless pit of earthly teachings, it becomes viable then for the beast. The beast, again, which is the institution, becomes viable because of that. Because the church could no longer maintain its power, if you will, over the over the beast, because the mystery had been lost. The mystery had been subordinated to the earthly level understanding, and all the saints and all the people who knew the truth had been eliminated, or marginalized, or deemed heretical, or whatever. And so the institution revived. And so this is how the beast ascends out of the bottomless pit. Okay, and then it eventually goes into perdition, because it remains vulnerable for the same reason it was vulnerable the first time. We just have to do what our predecessors did at first in order to overcome it. And, but when it says that when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And we had on here the reference to Revelation 12:12, about, it says, therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, the earth being, of course, the world, and the sea being, of course, the church. For the devil is come down to you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. And we talked about that. The short time, there was time, times, and half a time. The time was 2,000 years. The times were 2 times that, which amounts to 4,000 years. And then the half a time, of course, being the millennium, which is half of 2,000 years, which is 1,000 years. So it breaks down like that.
Well, it seems that we've lost Robert. But what Robert's saying is this short space is also referenced to in Matthew 24:22, and except those days should be shortened, there should be no flesh saved, but for the elect's sake those days shall be shortened. And then in Mark 13:20, and except that the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh should be saved, but for the elect's sake, whom he hath chosen, he hath shortened the days. And when Robert and I were discussing this, the devil kind of did a disservice to himself, because when he crucified Christ on the cross, he kind of lost a full 5,000 years on that fifth leg there, or the fifth head, because basically he lost, I don't know, quite a big stretch of time, and then all he had left was the 2,000 that was sort of prearranged, that he could have that between him and God. But now we're talking about the beast that was and is not, and even he is the 8th and is of the 7th, and go into perdition. Now, what's really important right here is, before we were talking about the heads, okay, and the horns, and that the heads have the horns. Okay, now here I want you to really take note that this is the beast that was and is not, and even he is the 8th and is of the 7th. So that's kind of like if you imagine that the beast is the body of this entity, and that he is counted as an 8th portion. It's not like there's an 8th head or anything, but that he is counted as a number, being that body. So, and then is of the 7. Well, yes, he's of the 7. He's connected to the 7. He's part of all of those heads. Okay, but so it's not as cryptic as it looks when you see exactly what he's saying. But and it goeth into perdition, and then we looked at when he goes into perdition in Revelation 20 verse 7, and then when the 1,000 years expires, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the 4 quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth, encompassed the camp of the saints about in the beloved city. And fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. And so, yeah, that's all of that. But that's talking about them going into perdition. Then we also discussed, Robert and I, and he may want to retell it once he comes back, but I guess I can kind of give you my understanding of it since I'm the only one here. And I will go on to tell you that, and the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received, and this word received I found very enlightening when you look into the Greek. It is lambano in the Greek, to receive, to take, to lay hold of. And it actually means to actively lay hold of, or to take or receive. In other words, even further defined is that they grab it aggressively. It's like they see their opportunity to take over this power of this kingdom, and it's made available, and so they just kind of snatch it up, and that they actually are very assertive about doing so. But it's not really their kingdom, and so they've really received no kingdom as yet, but received power. Again, that same word receive, lambano, and then power is exousia in the Greek, the power to act or the authority. So they don't really have power of their own, but they've been given this type of power or authority as kings 1 hour, and then the word hour is the word hora in the Greek, a time or period, an hour or season. Strong's Concordance, properly an hour, but figuratively a finite season. And that's what you're going to look at whenever you're looking into spiritual or heavenly meanings. Robert's calling now.
Okay, so when I cut off, though, do you remember what I was talking about?
You were at this space right in here. We were talking about the 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, the other is yet not come. That's where we left off.
So this is basically how it breaks down. You've got 7 kings and 5 are fallen. Of course, the 5 represent the 4,000 years leading up to the 5th millennium, and Judaism is basically cut off from God, and also in the natural by the Roman Empire. They go and destroy Jerusalem, scatter the Jews. And so basically it counts as 5, even though it doesn't round out 5,000 years. It's cut off very early in the period. And so for the rest of the 5th millennium, you basically have the church trying to overcome, if you will, the saints and to establish itself in the image of Judaism. Mm-hmm. And so it starts to become the 6th at that point, but it's still in the 5th millennium. And so it continues on again into the 6th millennium as the 7th because of that. So there is some overlap there. And so I know it's hard to explain, but that explains why the 6th one continues, because it's a continuation, or I'm sorry, the 7th one continues because it's a continuation of the 6th, which in this case is yeah. So again, it's a little tough to understand and even harder to explain.
Well, when we discussed it, Robert, the 5th one, you know, when Christ was crucified, that Satan had really done himself a disservice, that he had, you know, kind of shot off his nose to spite his face, you know, and lost part of that 5th one that he would have had, but because, you know, he wanted to, you know,
Yeah, I think that by losing, he kind of he lost some time. That this was like
right. He lost that portion of the fifth, and so the actual sixth started in the fifth. You know,
right.
And there's an overlap there. And
right.
so he still only had that 2,000 remaining. Or
right.
2 days.
Right. But because you see the end of Judaism and the beginning of Christianity, they're two separate things, but they occupy the same fifth millennium.
Right, the same space.
So one comes after the other, but you see why there's such an interest on the part of Satan to destroy Christianity, because Christianity had destroyed Babylon, and so the teachings or whatever had destroyed the entire institution. And so basically he had to destroy Christianity at that part. This again was like the dragon making war with the seed of the woman, that it would spew forth, just a flood of water, or its own words, in other words, in order to neutralize them and to make them powerless, which he essentially did and has gotten away with for 2,000 years. But remember, it says that the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the flood. Now, you look at that allegorically, it means that the earthly level, meaning opening its mouth, means that it's revealing the heavenly level which is contained within it. And all that flood of Christian teaching, all that flood of secularism, it now has no basis, and Babylon is right to be destroyed again. Exactly. And so, but this is kind of how it breaks down. Right. Now, again, so that means that the sixth king is in the fifth millennium, because it's transferred from Judaism to Christianity now, which now has two horns, because it is now a whole church-state system, or it's becoming a church-state system by the introduction of secularism and worldliness and so on and so forth. It's growing that extra horn, so that is no longer the church per se, but part of a system, part of the beast. And that's why you end up with 7 kings, or the 7 mountains. That has to do with in a sense, the changing of the guard. But the changing of the guard happens in the fifth millennium. And so essentially you have a head with 2 horns representing the end of Judaism and its a relationship with the world, specifically the Roman Empire. So that's 2 horns on one head. And then also Christianity starts to grow that other horn, in the sense that worldliness grows up in the church, and then it becomes a church-state system. And effectively runs that way through the remaining 2,000 years. That's why he must continue that short space, or in other words, that 2,000 years. But then it goes on to explain just what the beast is with relation to the heads. It says the beast that was and is not, meaning Judaism, and also the way it was in the fifth millennium, had been overcome and conquered, right? Even he is the 8th and is of the 7, because that's in the same way that maybe your hand has 5 fingers, right? And you could say, well, you have 5 fingers, and the palm of your hand is analogous to the beast, and your fingers being analogous to the heads. You could say that the palm of your hand is of the 5 fingers. Exactly. Right? So in this sense, he is the 8th part, because he's not just any one of those 1,000-year reigns, or any of those symbolic time periods. The heads of the mountains, in other words, that he is from beginning to end. That beast. So that's kind of how you would understand. Now it goes on, it says, the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. Now, first of all, we already talked about the 10 horns versus the 10 heads. We have to differentiate, because each of these 10 heads, these last 3 heads of the 7, have 2 horns apiece, because they're not solely God's people, but they are God's people in alliance, if you will, with the world. So you have the religious leadership and the religious kingdom all on the same head and in a balance of power, if you will, or sharing their power, if you will, with the world itself. And so the 10 horns you saw are 10 kings. And again, the first 4 horns had to do with basically with Judaism. And then once Judaism became part and parcel with the Roman Empire or whatever, now you had a balance, if you will, or an alliance between Judaism and the world. And so, in effect, there are 2 horns on that head, one of the world and one of religion. And when that was destroyed, became the beast which is not, in other words, it had been overcome, if you will, by the saints and by the message that they had. Then again, as the church slid into worldliness, as we looked at in chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation, there was this decline and fall of the church or whatever, that eventually, instead of fighting the world and instead of the world fighting it, it found its place in the world, and the world found a place in it, and it too had 2 horns. And that continues for 2,000 years. So that's the extra 2 heads and the extra 4 horns right there. And so that rounds out to 10 horns and 7 heads. Now, they received no kingdom as yet, and we highlighted what this meant. This had to do with actively laying hold or taking, like when Jesus said that that the wicked, the evil, take the kingdom by force. So received is kind of a one of those words that you got to look closely at too, because it isn't like they're going to be given it like you would receive a gift or something. It means they haven't taken power, or they haven't taken the kingdom, but what they've taken is power. I mean, I give you an example. I mean, it's like an acting mayor versus an elected mayor. An acting mayor might have power, but it doesn't, in effect, have the office. See what I'm saying? It's not really his position. He's just acting as mayor because the true mayor, is dead or incapacitated or something like that, and it's sort of interim, or it's sort of, he's not legit. So, in other words, they haven't actually taken the kingdom. And it explains it a little bit further down, too, that they've been given the kingdom. You know, in a sense that, you know, that they're only allowed to act this out. But it's not really their world. It is God's world and God's kingdom. And they haven't overcome God. They haven't actually conquered, right? They're in the position of acting as kings or receiving power as kings, right? But again, you know, somebody who's like a stand-in politician doesn't have that position. They're just acting in that position. These don't have God's kingdom. They only have power in the sense over God's people for a certain time. Each in turn has their own hour.
Right.
The 7 heads or whatever. So it isn't like they're all together in the same hour. It means that each in turn has their little hour, their little time frame, or whatever. Each one of the heads, in other words, with the beast, right? But these have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast, because again, you know, the beast is at war against God, and the beast basically wants to give these people what they want. They want worldly power. They want worldly things. You know, they want riches and, you know, all the stuff that's enumerated a little bit later on in the section here. They want to rule, and the beast is their ticket. This is why, like, even in today's society, now that the beast is kind of showing its head publicly, you know, forcing people to take sides. It's no longer underground. People are having to prove their bona fides, you know, through symbols, hand gestures, saying certain things, and they're speaking in terms of symbols or whatever to show that they are part of the world system. Well, this has been going on all along, but more or less behind the scenes at times, because, you know, the devil wants to hide himself at certain times and reveal himself at other times. And now that everything's coming to a head, you're starting to see. But in other words, but they've been giving their power and strength unto the beast or the institution all of this time. But again, these shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. So in other words, they know that they're to be overcome. I mean, after all, the ones at the beginning understood the meaning of this book. It was open to them. And they understood the import of what would happen, and so that was why they covered it up. They covered it up because they knew it to be true. But they also, and this is how the devil knows that he has but a short time, because he understands what these words mean. And so this is why he makes war with the saints, and this is why he makes war with God. And so, in other words, if you want to be successful in this world, one of the easiest ways is to make an alliance with Satan and to do his bidding, and to be part and parcel with his kingdom. So anyway, but this is how they have one mind, and they make war with the Lamb, and they give their strength to the beast and everything. But those who overcome him, again, are called and chosen and faithful, because it takes faithfulness in order to see the truth, and it takes God calling you in order to have that kind of insight. And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And again, remember we talked about the gospel needed to again be taught a second time, in other words, before nations and peoples and tongues and kings.
Right.
Okay. So anyway, so that's basically our job now, is to preach the gospel again to these people on that higher level meaning, so that they can become, figuratively speaking, allegorically speaking, the sons of Sarah rather than the sons of Hagar who were in bondage. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Well, again, the reason why these 10 horns are these 10 kings, and you know how we enumerated that. In these days, it has to do with the church and the state, both in alliance with one another. When the truth is revealed, when the truth is revealed and Babylon is destroyed for the second time, right? Then all of these people who made alliance with the beast, all of these people who are in alliance with the one world government and the one world religion and the one world everything, are all united under Lucifer. And what they're going to do is they're going to regret having been part of this whole system, because they will receive their condemnation. Now, the next verse states that God hath put it in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree, and to give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And this is the important thing. God has programmed certain things into the scriptures that require time in order to be fulfilled. And when they are fulfilled, they are to then be revealed. Now, in order to keep these things from being revealed before their time, it is necessary, in a way, to allow for false teachings to predominate. Because you need, in a sense, these wicked kings, and you need, in a sense, the wicked institution, in order to hide what is plainly visible, in order to obscure, in order to generate a whole false reality, a whole reality that is at war with God, so that people don't recognize these truths until they are all fulfilled. So in order to buy time, in a sense, such that the words that he has programmed into these allegories, into these parables, in order for these things to come to pass, he needs time, and that's what those kings are for. They're essentially duped by Satan, who exploits them for their own worldliness and their own worldly lusts and their own worldly desires, and he exploits them to his own ends. But in a nutshell, these people will realize that they are condemned and that they have been played, and so that through the discovery and the revealing of what these kings have done, And through everybody's recognition of and rejection of these kings and their kingdoms, of the beast and its kingdom, that they will in a sense be made desolate themselves, because they will be seen through, and all that they relied upon is going to flow away like water around them, because everyone will recognize the truth when God's words are fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
And so the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth, or those who promote the earthly teachings and the earthly ways and stuff. Secularism, for example, or just, false religion. But anyway, so in other words, the same thing that bought them time, it's all going to crumble before them. And they're going to suffer loss, just like the great whore is going to suffer loss. They're going to lose their kingdoms, their souls, and everything. Jesus even said, look, what does it gain you if you should gain the whole world but lose your soul, in the process? And these people realize just what the great whore, or the great city, in other words, has cost them. Then they're going to be bitter and angry. And so moving on to chapter 18, it says, and after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. Now, angel basically being the messenger, you can see it as a message or a teaching or something coming down from the heavenly level. This would be like the revelation of the heavenly Jerusalem, or the heavenly teaching. And it lightens the whole earth, right? What does it mean? It means that the earthly level teachings take on this whole other light.
Right.
You're seen in this whole other light. So in a sense, the cat is out of the bag.
Exactly.
It has to do with us now overcoming Babylon the second time. With the glory of the message, the glory of the truth, the glory of the gospel, which is preached again before many nations and peoples and tongues and kings. In other words, it's preached to Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
It's preached to those who are in bondage, to Hagar and to Babylon and to the great whore and to Jezebel, to all the false. It's all allegorical. It's all telling kind of the same story.
It is.
So you start to see it. Now he says, and he cried with a strong voice, meaning, what is that voice? The voice is a secret language, but why is it strong? Because it has power behind it. And it's saying that Babylon the Great is fallen. Or what did it say before? It just said that great city is fallen. But here it says again twice, Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. The one fall refers to the original fall. Remember he said the beast which is not? That was when Babylon fell the first time, due to the revelation. In other words, the earthly level meaning was then alighted with the glory of the heavenly meaning. And so therefore Babylon fell the first time. And so Satan used his functionaries, his minions, his tools, his kings, his rulers, his religious people, or whatever, in order to take that light away from the people. In order to murder the saints and to murder the prophets, so that it could then rise back up out of that bottomless pit of earthly teachings. Mm-hmm. So, in other words, all of this stuff, you got to see these connections here. But the first time it fell, for it to fall again means that it has risen up. Mm-hmm. That is the beast that comes up out of the pit. So that's why you say is fallen, is fallen. Now this is the second time. Now it says here that it is become the habitation of devils and the hold of every foul spirit and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. Again, this is Lucifer and his angels and also his religious functionaries, those who in a sense are above everybody else, the people in high places or whatever, these hateful and unclean birds. These are like the birds that came along and ate the seed. Remember this parable of the seed and the seed and the sower? The seed fell on the road. Now the road is the path that everybody takes. That's symbolic of tradition. And because it had always been tradition that there were only these so many books in the canon, right? When the seed or the word of God fell on tradition, which is the road, right? These evil birds came and ate it up. It means that all of this teaching and all of these books and everything were destroyed on account of tradition. And so, in other words, but it has become their cage and it has become their trap and everything. This is why it's been God's will. He's allowing these people to have enough rope in order to hang themselves, because he makes a difference between the obedient and the disobedient, and those that are for him, and again, those that are against him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he separates the sheep from the goats.
He does.
You know, so when he, in a sense, allows them the ability to either choose life or choose death, and they choose death, when he gives them the opportunity to either accept defeat or else to defeat those who are in the right for their own selfish purposes, again, he's giving them enough rope to hang themselves, and he's allowing them to do all of this evil stuff until his words are fulfilled. But when his words are fulfilled, their function is, when you hear that great voice, that strong voice of the truth, that message, the voice, in other words, the parabolic meaning, when you see that and are thus given strength by that, you are then able to destroy Babylon a second time. All right? And so it goes on. It has become the habitation of devils and a very foul spirit and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. This is so that they can be judged. For all nations have drunk the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. This is why they hate her. And the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacy. You know, because she paved the way for them. She made it. The kingdom itself, Babylon itself. You know, because it's a one world thing, because it's a singular thing where Lucifer is at the top. And he controls different entities and different fronts for different purposes and at different times and for his own selfish gain or whatever. He causes people to become as wicked as they can become in the process. And these people will all have to stand before God and be utterly condemned because they have become utterly wicked.
Right.
And so they are trapped in their own wickedness. Now, this is God admonishing us at this point. It says, the kings of the earth have waxed rich or whatever through the abundance of her delicacies or whatever. In other words, that was all laid at their feet so that they would essentially fall into the trap. And it says, I heard another voice from heaven. So this is another heavenly message. One of the things that you're going to be looking for within the scriptures, in other words, one of the keys, the voice, one of the heavenly keys is come out of her, come out of Babylon, come out of the system. You know, when you think about it, when you think about what will the world think when people leave the church en masse, and for reasons of 2,000 years of deception, when the whole world sees that the church is become dependent upon you know, because it is part of the world, because they have to pay their bills and they have to pay employees and they have to, you know, make buildings and structures and things like that. And how will they be able to do those kinds of things if they no longer have any support?
Right.
When you see the entire collapse of the entire institution because people are able to see, then the whole world will take note of this. It will be something that the whole world will see. Right? But he's telling you to come out of her, to come out of Hagar, to come out of bondage, in other words, and become the children of Sarah, become children of the Jerusalem that is above, that is about to come down. All right? So that you be not partakers of her sins, and that you receive not of her plagues. All right? So in other words, continue to do what she is doing, right? So like if you've done it before, stop. If you're giving your money and your voice and your power to an entity that is blocking God, that is stopping people from telling the truth, that is ignoring the saints, that is blowing them off who are coming to give them the truth, then you become a partaker of her sins because you become part of an institution that is standing up against the Almighty God.
Right.
And you become worthy of receiving of her plagues if you do so, because you have put yourself at enmity with God and his teaching. And it says, for her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. Well, how their sins have reached into heaven in the sense that, first of all, the heavenly meaning was totally and utterly destroyed by these false teachers and these false teachings. That the whole heavenly level was subverted. Mm-hmm. And everything became on the lower level, on the level of the flesh. And so we went from being the children of Sarah, which are the children of heaven, unto the children of Hagar, which are the children of the bondwoman, which are to be cast out. And this is how the false teachers are to be cast out. And God hath remembered her iniquities. In other words, he has given the kings of the earth or whatever power to rule until his words are fulfilled. And when his words are fulfilled, then he will remember her iniquities upon their heads. Right? So in other words, when you start seeing the judgment, when you recognize it in your spirit and in your mind with that other eye, that spiritual eye, not the flesh, but the spiritual eye, when you understand it with the spiritual ear and not just the fleshly ear, when you see Sarah and Hagar and such things as allegories, as Paul explains, rather than just individuals, right, then you understand that his judgment is coming, because he wouldn't allow it until his words were fulfilled. And now that his words are being fulfilled, or have been fulfilled, then the next thing is that the remembrance of these evils are going to be visited upon the church and upon Babylon as a whole. Now, it goes on.
We had also discussed, I just want to do a little, when we look at the institutional churches of the world, we see it especially here in Babylon, USA, of the 501c3 tax-exempt status.
Oh, yeah.
Which requires certain sacrifices from the people as remaining passive to government or political agendas. It's an actual corporation, which is an entity that can buy and sell under the name of whatever respective church that is. It can, incur debt. And but Jesus told us, he said about tax exempt, more or less. I mean, he didn't say that word, but he said in Matthew 22:20, and he saith unto them, whose is this image and superscription? And they said unto him, Caesar's. Then he saith unto them, render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. And that, there's a lot more here in this little pop-up if people want to look into it once we release this document, but for everyone to look at. But go ahead.
That does pertain. I mean, there's the other horn, of course.
Right.
But it does pertain to this. But think about it on a deeper level. Here we are standing at the cusp. We've got 1 foot in the old and 1 foot in the new. All right? Here we are as children of the light emerging out of darkness. Here we are as children of the heavens emerging out of the children of the earth. Okay? Now, what is it telling us to do? It's telling us to repay to the kings their due, and to repay Babylon their due, in order to give God what is God's. You see? That's in a sense the other side of the coin.
It is.
That Caesar has gotten what is Caesar's, right? And he will get what Caesar deserves. But you come out of Caesar. You come out of Babylon. And you give God what is God's. And what is God's? That is you. You are God's.
You, exactly.
So
the living sacrifice.
But see, this is, you say render under Caesar. Well, render under the great whore. What is the great whore? What is it? He's telling us to reward her right here in the next sentence. He says, reward her double even as she rewarded you, and double unto her, double under according to her works. In the cup which she hath filled, fill to her double. Well, in other words, she lied and she covered up the truth. The great city, the Caesars of the world, right? They hid the truth. They obscured the truth. They told you that they were the truth. They sat in God's seat as though they spoke as representatives of God to us. They were the antichrists. Okay? This whole spirit is one of Antichrist. I am God. I say what is good. I say what is right. It is not his own word that explains itself. It is I who, and this is their attitude towards it. Okay? And so what do? Well, since they took it away, what happens to them when you reveal it? You undermine.
Like they have to eat their own words.
No, well, they're going to have to eat something. They're going to die. The point is that the point is, because they took away the mystery and they made 2,000 years of their kingdom, their world. They set their kingdom up against God's kingdom, just like Satan. They gave their power to the beast, most of them knowingly, just like Satan. Okay? So, in other words, how do you repay her? You see, because she hid the truth, you're revealing the truth is repaying her.
Yes.
Because she destroyed you, the fact that you now exist again, right, that God's words are now explained again, destroys her.
Mm-hmm.
It means it's poetic justice is what it means. In other words, she in a sense kills herself. You know how like Judas killed himself?
Mm-hmm.
Well, but then that's allegorical too, because Judas was one who feigned affection for Jesus in order to profit and to fulfill his own desires. All right? And so a feigned love of Jesus, that's what these people did. They pretended to love Jesus so as to substitute themselves as the truth. And so they created a false truth and a false image of Christianity in order to reign for their own selfish purposes. Mm-hmm. So they are in effect all of them Judases. And so they in effect kill themselves in the process, because the thing that they built their kingdoms upon is vulnerable to the truth. And so God has allowed them to build and to build and to build what? All the way up to the heavens. Just like Babylon. You see the imagery? See, in other words, they're building their kingdoms as if they were God. And as if you see what I'm saying? They're exalting themselves to the heavens in the process. That's
how her sins have reached unto him.
So, in other words, but when God remembers her iniquities, what it means is that that's the elect coming out on the earth and revealing them, exposing them for what they are and what they've done. And you see, now you give back to Caesar what is Caesar's. And what is Caesar's? Perdition, destruction, death, the thing that they deserve. And you can provide them with those things. You can be an agent of God's retribution simply by being light and telling the truth and not backing down from it.
Right.
And you can destroy Babylon. Remember, it says it's fallen, it's fallen. It had fallen before, it will fall again.
Exactly.
You just have to do your part. And I know that there are going to be people who listen to this and they will just blow it off and they won't do their part. People are just like that. But you know what? You don't have to answer to me. You don't have to answer to Carol. You don't have to answer to any one of your brothers and sisters. The one you're going to answer to is going to judge you based on your actions and your inactions, what you do and what you fail to do. What is within your power and what you do with it, that is who you're going to have to account to. So you have no fear of God. You just go on and you take the side. But he says, do not be a partaker of her sins, so that you'd receive not of her plagues. And if you are going to continue to bolster the church, if you're going to continue to go there and give them your money when they won't listen to you, go and talk to them. Show them the truth. Talk to the parishioners. Let them kick you out maybe. But you go up and you tell them the truth. This has to be a movement. God, this is an imperative. I mean, if you love the world so much that you're going to want to keep it going and keep it going and keep it going, right? God's writing this down. He's going to remember your iniquities too. And he's going to visit those plagues upon you and your house as well. You have to do the right thing. That's what he's calling you to do. If you see this stuff, you are responsible for it. You understand it, you have to make the move. You have to be a voice. The world is full of people who make their voices heard. This cause and that cause. You hear about these people and those people. The people who want to get married in your church and they don't follow God's laws. They're making their voices heard.
Right.
People out there who kill other people because of their religion and they're championed by their own people. Well, they're making their voices heard. Why won't you make your voice heard?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you got to think about that. Why can't you be bold? I mean, especially when you understand that you are aligned with God's purpose when you do that.
Right.
But if you will hear and you will not listen, remember what Jesus said to the apostles. He said, look, if they will not hear you, you know, you scrape off the dust of your feet against them and say, you know this, that the kingdom has come near to you. Right? So as to condemn them. Because this is the attitude that God takes towards those who hear the truth and ignore it. And so, you know, it's not coming from me. But you have to repay them for what they have done. This is God's will. You have to destroy Babylon. This is God's will.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so this is no playing around. And look at what she's done. Look at what she's done. Look at verse 7. It says, how much she hath glorified herself. In other words, she killed the saints. She destroyed the truth. She took away God's kingdom and took it for her own and glorified herself. And that is what the church has done. That is what the world has done. Mm-hmm. They have set their throne up against God's throne. Right? What have they done? They glorified themselves. Live deliciously. So much sorrow and torment give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and I am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, that is the Sabbath, which is right now, the 7th millennium. Mm-hmm. Death and mourning to her, and famine. She shall be utterly burned with fire. The judgment of God is going to come down on her. And it says, for strong is the Lord God who judgeth her. And we are strong through him, because we have this strong voice that we got from this messenger, this angel, the teaching. It says, and the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning. And then the smoke of her burning is basically this. When they start seeing the people leaving the church in droves, condemning the church with one voice, and you know, when you see the churches, they either can convert or understand, or else they'll face God's wrath. You know, you are there to speak the truth and to be a light. You know, right. And if by the truth and if by the light, you know, the walls of Jericho come crashing down, the city of Babylon falls. All these metaphors, they're you know, you go around it the 7 times. You know, that's Jericho. You all blow the trumpet. You scream with one voice. You know, one purpose, and it will fall. You know, that's the imagery. It's there for you to learn from. You know, teach it to other people. Be a part of what actually happens. Be bold. Because God is going to remember her iniquities. He's starting to remember her iniquities, and he's telling you what to do. He's telling you to come out of her. He's telling you to give her torment. He's telling you to be active. Right? Because he is going to destroy her at our hands. And again, they will bewail, and they will see her. I mean, how much do you want to see these clowns who are running the world get what's coming to them? How much do you want to see that? I mean, it goes without saying, but I mean, you know, people, they lie to you on the news. You see that every day.
Oh, they do.
They lead you astray. They show you some things. They don't show you other things. There's so many manufactured stories, so much falsehood, so much death. And you really want to see that go on and on and on and on and on when God has given you the power to destroy it? You know, to speak with one voice. You know, that is what we are called to do. And again, they're going to be judged. It says, and the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas. Again, twice.
Twice, yes.
For that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. Again, that hour is the millennium. And the merchants of the earth. Now, who are the merchants of the earth? Those who, figuratively speaking, is those who
buy and sell.
Buy and sell. Those are the leaders of the church.
Mm-hmm.
When Jesus says, you have made my house, my Father's house, a den of thieves or whatever, a house of merchandise. right?
Right.
In the Gospel of Thomas, where it speaks of the people who spurned God's gift because they had a wedding to plan or whatever, then it concludes with buyers and sellers will not enter into the kingdom of God. Right? It just has to do with those people who see church as a business and see the house of God as something to exploit, and they're everywhere.
Everywhere.
But again, what does it say? The merchants of the earth, that is to say the earthly level teaching, those who have made hay with that lower level meaning, right, will mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise anymore. I think it's funny how I think it's funny how
what you're saying now.
It's funny
I'm not
how
buying it anymore.
Say that. Yeah, I mean, I don't put anything past God, but it's an interesting little aside that you don't buy it, you don't buy it.
I don't buy it anymore.
Yeah, I got you. But anyway, their merchandise, again, he's speaking about merchandise here. So that merchandise colors the whole rest of what is being said. It means that it's an earthly level thing. The merchandise of gold, in other words, gold is merchandise instead of God's gold, which is clear and transparent. Well, tried by the fire, but is also clear and transparent. It means that it's something that you can see through. But it's saying, because that's the true gold, the one that's been tried by the fires of this age, which is His word, His truth. Right. This is why the streets are made of gold. I'm getting ahead of myself, because instead of it being the old traditions and the old ways and the way in which we walk, we now walk in clarity. Our foundation is clear to us. We understand why we're stepping and where we're stepping, and we see things all the way through. Okay, but in contrast to that, you have gold as merchandise, silver as merchandise, precious stones as merchandise, and of pearls. And again, what did we just see? The whore was adorned with gold and pearls and stones and stuff like that. That's the earthly city. Fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and all Thyian wood and all manner of vessels of ivory and all manner of vessels of most precious woods and of brass and iron and marble and cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and beasts and sheep and horses and chariots and slaves and souls of men. Now, who's in charge of the souls of men? Is not the church? I mean, they're the ones who are supposed to be teaching people to save their souls, to help them to find, themselves in God and God in themselves. All right? All of these words have certain kind of other dimensions, but as merchandise, they really don't. In the context of what is being said, these people only value actual gold and actual silver and actual stones and actual pearls. They don't want pearls of truth. They don't want, it's not metaphorical in this instance, because it was with reference to people who don't see and or accept things on the metaphorical level. Right. It says, but the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee. This is how you pay them back. They took it to us from fraud. Even James say, look, the wages of the workers have been held back by fraud. Right? And God has taken note of this, and He's going to repay them by pulling you out of them, because you are the thing that supports them. You are the one who pays them their tithes, and you are the one who participates in their culture, and you value what you're buying what they're selling, in other words. Right. And as long as you are not a consumer of filth, then filth will dry up. And if you are not a consumer of falsehood, then falsehood would dry up. That's right. You have to remove yourself from the system. So you have to hit them where it hurts. All the things that they long for, they use you and exploit you to achieve. And he says, the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee, and all things which are dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all at Babylon's second fall. Right? The merchants of these things, which were made rich by her, shall stand afar off for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls.
Alas, alas again.
Yeah, it's twice. Funny how that is. Yeah. For in 1 hour, and this is with reference to the sailors being those that are on the sea. These are the churches proper. This is them exclusively. I think. This is for master. Yeah. Because again, the sea is this age and is founded on God's word, which is the sea, as opposed to the land. It says, "For in 1 hour so great riches has come to naught, and every shipmaster and all the company in ships and sailors, and as many as trade by sea, stood afar off." So this is with reference to the Christian church. And so these are the merchants, if you will, of the sea. That is to say, exclusively of the church or of God's people.
Right.
And they cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, "What city is like unto this great city?" And they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, "Alas, alas, that great city wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness." And again, the ships in the sea, these are the various churches. And the reason of her costliness is this. It costs money to run a church. It costs money to have buildings. It costs money to have staff. It has to do.
Well, it's a business.
Well, it does. It's buying and selling, basically, right?
It's a corporation.
But again, for in 1 hour she is made desolate. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets. Again, he's brought in the holy apostles and prophets here to underscore the fact that this is the religious institution in and of itself. So again, because why? Because those who dwelled in the heavens and on the heavenly level, meaning were killed by the church, were killed by Babylon, were murdered. And the holy apostles, they had their words destroyed and undermined. And pretty much all of the holy apostles, with the exception of John, perhaps, were also martyred. And the prophets too. And God is going to avenge them on her. So, in other words, vengeance is coming. And, that's because all of his words have been fulfilled. And now, he is visiting their sins upon the institution. So, again, this is an urging to either come out of the church and reject it, or else if you're running a church, you need to decide whose side that you're on,
right?
And who you want to support. Because if you're one of those people who is lamenting that Babylon is falling, if you're one of these people that's sorry to see, that money or whatever and all that may lose its value, that you may lose some of it, you may lose some of the assets that you have and some of the wealth that you have. If you're like the rich person who didn't want to give it all up and give it to the poor or whatever, then you're not going to enter into the kingdom, and you will be avenged, or the holy prophets that you impede will be avenged on you. And again,
it's back to Revelation 6:9 too, about these souls that were under the altar. They were crying forth for this.
They were crying for them. Yeah,
to be avenged.
That's true, Carol. That's a very useful insight there. It has to do with their time has come. And again, it continues. "And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. And the voice of harpers and musicians and of pipers and of trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee, and no craftsman of whatsoever craft he be shall be found any more in thee. And the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee. And the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee. And the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth. For by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints, and all that were slain upon the earth." Well, again, the millstone being cast into the sea, of course, being the church age, God's people. If you go back to, say, Matthew 18:5, Mark 9:42, Luke 17:1, for example, it talks about the millstone. It says in Matthew 18:5, for example, "And whoso shall receive one such little child in my name receiveth me. But whosoever shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and that he were drowned in the depths of the sea. Now the little one, this is speaking in code, the little child, the little children, or whatever, these have to do with those who believe implicitly, like the elect, for example. The elect are often spoken of as children, because it is the children who receive the truth of the message in its simplicity, and it is the elect who receive the truth of the message in its simplicity. And again, why is it better for them that a millstone were hanged about his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea? Because it would be better for him to be destroyed before he could do the damage that he's going to do than it would be after the fact, when that millstone is cast into the sea after the damage is done, because he's going to have to face judgment for the damage that was done. And so, in other words, he's saying it would be better if you did not do this damage than after the fact if you had done this damage. Mm-hmm. So, in other words, because the great city shall be thrown down and shall be found no more at all. So that's the complete and utter destruction and condemnation. That, in other words, the beast that is carrying the woman, the woman is Babylon, and the beast is thrown into the lake of fire along with the false prophet, that is to say, the prophet that preaches the earthly understanding so as to obscure the heavenly understanding. And see, it'll be found no more at all, because in the millennium, nobody is going to be fooled by that teaching anymore. And nobody's going to be ruled by that institution anymore. And the only one who gets a brief respite is Satan himself. And when he's released again for the second time, not to get ahead of myself, but he is going to go out on the breadth of the earth or whatever to surround the great city again, but he won't be able to use the false institution, the beast, and he won't be able to use that false prophet, because they are already burning in the lake of fire. But he will appeal, I think, to people's desires or whatever to rule the earth again on their own selfish desires. But we'll get into that. But I mean, but the point is that at the point at which you overcome Babylon a second time, what does it say? That it shall be heard no more at all in you. It means that the church and the false teaching are utterly done away with forever at that point. Mm-hmm. And they never rear their heads again. And that the elect in the millennium will thus be free to reign as kings and priests in Christ. In that heavenly meaning, in other words. And
this is also foretold in Jeremiah 25:10. Moreover, I will take from them the voice of mirth, the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom, and the voice of the bride, the sound of the millstones, and the light of the candle. I just found all of those little things, highlighted right there in Jeremiah.
Yeah, that is an excellent insight. Again, the light of the candle. Yeah, there's definitely a connection there with that. But they won't be happy, that's for sure. It says you're going to take away their gladness and their mirth.
Right. It's all gone.
And so again, the light of the candle, like it says in Jeremiah, shall shine no more at all in thee, and the voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. And that thy merchants were the great men of the earth. For by thy sorceries were all nations deceived, and in her was found the blood of the prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth, or obscured by this earthly meaning. And again, you read throughout here sorceries and of whatever craft or whatever. The sorceries have to do with the poisonous drugs or the poisonous teachings, the deceptions of witchcraft, right? And that comes up again, I think, a little bit later in Revelation 2, where it talks about sorceries. But sorceries, I think the word there, did you look that one up?
I didn't look that
one up. The word there is pharmakeia in one instance, and in this instance, is it the same word? But in any case, this has to do with the witchcraft. Again, witchcraft is like the way in which you use the lower to obscure the higher, and the way in which you invoke the powers of evil in order to, because God has put it in the hearts of the kings and put it in the hearts of men to do evil and to give their power unto the beast. This whole mystery of iniquity, the thing that's showing itself now throughout the world, because it imagines that, it's too late for you to do anything against it, and it can be open now, and that you've lost all your power against it. Well, we're being given a strong voice and a strong platform at the moment, which we need to take advantage of so that we can overcome the sorceries and the witchcrafts upon which the false church and our whole world of false kings and false lords and whatever can also be overcome. It's time for us to turn the tables on them, to let the cat out of the bag, so to speak, and to light up the earth with the heavenly light. And so, that's basically kind of how it ends here in this section. They shed the blood of the prophets. They shed the blood of the saints. You were there to avenge the prophets. You were there to avenge the saints and all of those who were destroyed by this whole earthly level teaching. You were there to both to avenge their blood and also to free the nations and the peoples and the tongues and the kings that are under bondage, that are under the covenant of bondage, which is Hagar. And by means of recognizing the allegorical level as opposed to the strict legalistic letter of the law, you are to make them sons of Sarah, to make them sons of the free woman, to make them the children of the promise. And remember, this letter was written close to 2,000 years ago, so all of this stuff was promised to us. So this is God's promise, which you have a chance to fulfill. And I can't think of anything in the world, once you have this knowledge, that's more important. I know people will just go on to the next video and the next person and go on to the next thing, and people have that nature about them. They won't get serious, they won't settle down, but some of you will, and those who hear it, you understand that you must. You have to stand up against it, because he's going to tread Satan under our feet. He's going to empower us to do it. And we are going to be his agents of change in this world. And so take the earthly understanding and light it up. Take that strong voice, take that strong position. Realize that when God gives you the sword, he expects you to fight. When he gives you the eyes, he expects you to see. When he gives you the ears, he expects you to hear. And now that he's given us a mouth and a platform, he expects us to speak. That we are to put on the whole armor of God and to fight like Christian soldiers with the tools of the Spirit, with the weapons of the Spirit.
That are not fleshly.
You're not going to be hacking off people's heads, okay? We're not going to be setting them on fire, okay? We're not going to be burning down buildings, okay? We're going to be pulling down strongholds. And our enemy is all who stand against God and all who stand behind a falsehood and a lie, because God is telling us that they are vulnerable. And therefore, we have to believe that they are vulnerable, and we are powerful in the face of that, because he has spoken it. And this was 2,000 years ago. And it's been sitting here all this time, and to be revealed now means that the words that he is waiting to have their fulfillment are now fulfilled. And now it is time to remember their iniquities against them.
Yes.
So I know this was kind of a heavy section. It was a little hard to plod through it. It's really hard to explain this stuff. It's hard for Carol and me to get together and, just hash all of this stuff out. And we're like, oh, how are we going to explain this? Or, and so it takes a little prep. It takes a little bit of us getting together and whatever. And this is just a first step. Once we see it, once you see it, we can always elaborate upon it. We can smooth it out. It'll be better. But, I mean, you're starting to see the beginnings of this, I hope. I hope that we've done our job in trying to explain this, because I got to tell you, we stepped out in this. We stepped out in faith. We trusted that God would reveal things to us along the way. Yeah. And I trust that he has. I know that he has. He's revealed to us things that we didn't know when we started this.
Right.
Because we've discussed so many things and we've received so many insights, and we struggled and struggled and struggled, and God always came through for us. So I feel like at this point we have a complete confidence that that we will be able to finish this and to complete it and to lay it before you. And so I think that if we are able to do this in any way, shape, or form, there has to be some reason for it. And
well, I say, what's to stop someone else from understanding and learning from this series and studying it maybe with another person, or maybe just under the direction of the Holy Spirit, and be given even further insights and be able to explain concepts that we, kind of didn't get into deeply, and that they can build on and open people's eyes even further to this heavenly meaning versus the earthly meaning.
Well, you have to understand that that's what God is telling us to do. He's telling us to stand up and to be strong. If at any given moment, remember, he said that when that day comes, that he will give us a mouth and a wisdom.
Yes.
That no one will be able to deny or to gainsay, right? What it means is that it will be given to us at the time. And that's what I believe is happening. I think we're seeing that happen. So if you stand up and you open your mouth, if it is God's will, he will allow his words to flow through you. And he will open up your mind and your heart and your spirit and cause you to recognize things you didn't know were there, because it's time to do it.
He's done it so many times while we're in discussion, behind the scenes, Robert. I mean, we both go away from our conversations sometimes just in awe.
But the point is, you gotta put that one foot in front of the other. You gotta take that chance. You gotta take that stand. Because again, when you start to experience victory over ignorance and victory over the devil, don't think he's gonna go easy, but you have to recognize he's gonna go, and he's gonna go at our hands. So share, to teach. Build, elaborate, use your gifts, use your abilities, use your skills, but most of all, give your members to God to use in his service, and recognize that reality is about to change. Things are about to go down.
Yes.
This isn't like you can sit on this for years and for decades and whatever. The millennium is here. And we are in that place where God has sworn to give us rest. And we have rested from the world and are now, in his will, I believe, because we are able to speak such things and to reveal such things. And, so say what you will, do what you will, but he has thrown down the gauntlet. He said to come out of her, to not be partakers of her sins. If you recognize the sins of the church, if you recognize the sins of the world, then God is going to hold you accountable.
Right.
I can't emphasize or underscore that enough, because you're going to receive of her plagues. When she goes down, you're going to go down with it. You have to decide whose side you're on. You're either for him or you're against him. And that's the way he looks at it.
Right.
So it's our job to warn those who are stubborn and will not listen, but it is up to you to be obedient.
Right.
And those of you who are not stubborn and will listen, you also have to recognize that every single one of us plays a part. He comes with 10,000s of his saints. What does that mean?
So each one of us have a job. And, even if we're just a fingernail or a pinky or whatever, we each have a part, whether it be to hold sessions like this, or to study and share with a friend, or to do comments, sharing what God has revealed to you. There's so many things that I couldn't even mention them all. But
just finish what it says though. He comes with 10,000 of his saints, all right. So it's not on the shoulders of one or two people.
Exactly.
But what are they there to do? To
conquer.
He cometh with 10,000s of his saints to condemn the ungodly of all the ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and of all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him.
Right.
See, that lines up with this whole section right here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's Jude borrowing from the book of Enoch, which he considered to be scripture, which he considered to be prophecy, which he considered to be ancient. By his own words, you can determine that that was his opinion, and that is in the Bible. That is in your scriptures. He's telling us that he, along with the clouds, he, along with the saints, is going to conquer the world by means of the sword of his word. And that's what this book is about. So I don't want to beat it to death. I think that's probably enough for this particular session. But okay. I mean, it's a serious deal. You know, you can't. If you understand what's being said, you understand what's going down. Enough said.
Right. Well, we welcome your comments, but ask that you confine your comments to the video subject matter, you know, as much as possible. And this is to benefit all the viewers. Now, should you have any concerns of a private or doctrinal nature that's really not applicable to this series, please message one or both of us privately. You can do this by going to our respective channels and click the About tab, ABOUT tab. Then click the Message tab and fill in your message and send it. Brother Robert and I encourage you to share these videos as you are led by the Holy Spirit. This is the Resurrected Word Radio Show, where we believe that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. God bless you all, and thanks for watching, commenting, rating, sharing, and subscribing.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you too, Robert.